Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 5 Facility Management Challenges Bleeding Facility Budgets Dry. I'm Jennifer Getz, the Editorial Director of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by AkitaBox. Before we get started, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. There will be a question and answer segment at the end of this presentation. Please find the question box in the dashboard on your screen towards the bottom. This is where you can submit questions for our speakers today. If at any time you experience a technical difficulty, please send us a message via that question section and someone on our team will answer you privately. Now, without further ado, I'm happy to introduce your speakers for today. Ken Dehkes is currently the Associate Vice President for Facility Services at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota. He has been at Hamline University in facilities since 1989. Prior to his work at Hamline, Ken worked in corporate facilities management for 8 years. He has a Bachelor's of Science degree in horticulture science, specializing in landscape management and design from the University of Minnesota. Josh Lau has worked with technology focused on the built environment for over 15 years. In 2016, he co-founded AkitaBox, a SaaS application for proactive building management. As Chief Solutions Engineer at AkitaBox, Josh and his team are focused on achieving data visualization and accuracy, integrating data sets into existing clients' programs, and developing new strategies for compliance. Ken, Josh, thank you for joining us today.
As long as I can find my mute button, we'll be good. Thanks for having us today, and happy to have our guest with us, Ken, who frankly brings a wealth of experience, been in the industry over 30 years, great little university out there in the Twin Cities area. We will not settle the debate of who has more lakes, Wisconsin or Minnesota today in this webcast, but maybe in a future one. But what we do want to talk about, and frankly have a little bit of a candid conversation. This is not meant to be, a commercial by any means. We really want to have a meaningful dialogue here around the things that are really plaguing not just higher ed, but really, anybody who has multiple buildings and lives in that institutional world and maybe has a central utility plant, and space use and staffing and all those things are changing at a rapid pace. And our COVID experience, in all industries has maybe in some ways fast forwarded us 10 years with some of the technology, and that fast forward has caused some change either in how people are looking for jobs, how they're using space, and frankly, how people are coming back to buildings, which is kind of changing our world and causing some impacts. And so we want to have some conversations today around that. The challenges we're going to go through, and we aren't going to dwell on this, but I want to make sure everybody understands what we are talking about, is staffing, operations. So things like work orders, PMs, how are we taking those strategies to heart? And frankly, a lot of this rolls back to that staffing conversation, which we'll have. Asset and energy management, space utilization, and ultimately, how are we securing budgets based upon all this change and all this data that we're collecting and looking at. And so with that, let's dig into it and start out with our challenge number one, which frankly, as we were having conversations leading up to this, and I have the benefit and the privilege of talking to folks all over the country, and in a lot of cases all over the world about these same issues that they're encountering and how they're handling those. And staffing is one that consistently comes up. We consistently have the conversation that I'll call it jack of all trades workforce is looking at retirement. Up in Ken's neck of the woods, they're looking at moving to one of those lakes and fishing for the rest of their lives. And there's a lot of institutional knowledge that goes with that exodus of those employees at that stage of their career. And then how do we transition that to the new employees? And frankly, how do we recruit and retain those employees in the environment where they're just not coming to the table to apply? And so with that, Ken, I'm going to throw a question to you, at least to start out with it. And that really is, what are those big issues surrounding staffing for you and hiring? And are there areas to which you find better success maybe in staff and retaining employees, and or is it just across the board really tough right now?
Gosh, I really feel like staffing for in our world, in the world that I've been living in for the last 4 or 5 years, has probably been the most time-consuming challenge to to work on. I think there's a number of reasons for the staffing. At the heart of it, I think there's fewer people entering the trades. And so we have really a shrinking workforce, especially with some of the skill sets or licenses that are required for our operation. We run a central plant with high pressure steam boilers, and there aren't that many of those people that have had that kind of training. Usually that came out of the Navy, but the Navy long ago moved on from steam for power sources. So there just aren't that many of those people out there. But as you mentioned, I think it's across the board. We've struggled finding plumbers, electricians, even landscape technicians or skilled land care staff. So that's one of the things. The other thing, as you mentioned, are the staff that we have had are all coming of age. They're an aged workforce. I think our average age 5 years ago was 59 years old. And I know as I've talked to my colleagues in higher ed at other institutions, that that's the case also. There's skewed from probably even the normal, workforce age is quite a bit older on average. And so a lot of people are coming of retirement age. And so we've experienced that and probably haven't done as good of a job with the succession planning that's really important to address that. I know we brought it up within our own organization about 10 years ago, but that always doesn't translate into action. So that's what probably are the couple of the keys. I think the other thing is that younger workforce that are out there either have perceptions of facility work or again, the skills and activities that happen in facilities maybe aren't as appealing to a lot of younger workforce. So those kind of combinations make us need to be really creative on how we're going to attract as well as retain our facility staff going forward.
So great comment. I love the word that you used at the end, right? We need to get creative. And, as we talk about creativity around these things and succession planning and frankly, all that institutional knowledge that's built up in that workforce with the average age of 59, right? Like, you look at that and you go, wow, there's a wall coming, but there's also a lot of value that frankly we need to extract. And to your point, get creative in how we extract that. And, one of the things that we talked about when we were up sitting in your offices was, maybe some strategies that we might be able to deploy, especially now that you've moved to a much more, facility data centric technology where now we have the ability to do things like QR code scanning. And one of the strategies, creative strategies that we talked about was maybe, creating your own internal YouTube channel that we start to, get that average age of 59 who has all of that amazing knowledge and frankly practical knowledge that we'd love to bottle up and pass on to the next generation. And boy, wouldn't it be nice, if we could bottle it up in a way that next generation actually likes to consume data. And so, along those lines of, YouTube channels and putting things into data and maybe finding more of that information like the O&M manuals and things, and putting them in somewhere where it's a much more accessible resource versus, hey, we spend 2 hours going and digging through paperwork to find what we need. Talk to me a little bit, and I know that we're only on, I also like to tell people this transition to good data isn't a sprint, it's a journey. And I know that we're, kind of in the maybe earlier middle part of your journey along, moving towards some of those creative solutions. But in your opinion, how's this move to technology kind of changing maybe even your excitement towards how we're going to change some of these things in the future? And how do you see that change in technology and really moving towards that data-centric world maybe affecting in the future how you get staff on board, and maybe how excited they are to come work for somebody who isn't, using, I'll call it a legacy CMMS that frankly neither the young or old worker want to engage with, because it seems like something that nobody should be using anymore. And so explain to me a little bit maybe around your excitement or where you're looking for that future and that creativity that you're moving towards.
Well, I think with staff that we are trying to attract now, I think that they embrace the technology. It probably is still a little bit of a struggle for somebody like myself of my age, but I think the staff that we've recently hired in the last couple of years, and it's over 50% of our organization, is new. It's pretty amazing. It's kind of exciting. We have lost hundreds of years of institutional knowledge. That's the bad part. But I think the technology and capturing building information, operating procedures, I think that there's staff that are coming in now are okay with using their phones, using an iPad, using the technology, using different communication skills than the people that had recently retired. And so I think we need to leverage that. And I think it creates a way to fill that knowledge or history gap that we've always struggled with. It's always frustrating, I think, when staff that have been really productive leave and everything is in their minds when they left, and there wasn't a way to really capture that. So I think the aspect of how our work order system or CMMS can also be at the heart of communicating information that's relevant and can be obtained out in the field, and is kind of the platform for us from an organization to actually hold all of that building information. I know when we had talked before, I kept pointing to the 3-ring binders on the shelf in my office as the method for looking up something. And then I kind of thought to myself, I don't think I've ever seen anybody come into my office and ask for one of those 3-ring binders to take a look at. So I think that, again, for a new staff person, I think it's exciting because I think there's going to be an opportunity for them to help add and build that database and information base. And it's also a way to communicate amongst a team of people what the history has been, what's going on, how I can access information, how I can get answers in a creative way. I think it's really exciting, and I think it's part of the solution of a number of the other challenges that we have. But to me, it's a part of selling the opportunity to work in a facilities in a higher ed environment such as ours, and they'll be able to make a difference and have lots of great tools to use. And frankly, some of the three-dimensional physical aspects of being in facilities maybe can be lessened because they can use their time and skills and not break their back doing it all day long.
Sure. Good transition. You brought up work orders. I think that's a good thing to move on to, and we talk about staffing and we talk about some of the struggles, and you and I had some, conversations offline about, which areas do you outsource and maybe get some services to, and, maybe those are areas where it is a high turnover rate. And so outsourcing is really alleviating that management of that turnover for some of those areas. And maybe also outsourcing is a response to, I just can't find skill sets in that area. And so we have to kind of hire professionals and team with a, licensed plumber or HVAC contractor, somebody else that comes in and helps us out. And we become a little bit more of that strategic head in some of those areas. One thing that I'm interested in hearing from you, and, the conversation that I've been having lately out on the road is, especially after the changes in COVID, and some of our buildings were just not maintained to the level, or they were shut off and we didn't really shut them down. And so we're still reeling from some issues from that, and we're behind on PMs and all of those things. And one of the conversations that I have that's always enlightening is, the conversation around what's your strategy? Right? Do you know how much you can do with the staff you have? And this gets into the data, that we're focusing on with you right now, which is how many things do I have in my building, and how many hours would it take if I PM'd all of them, and how many hours do I have available, and where do those lines meet? Because the thing that I'm hearing out there a lot is, well, we heard PMs were the thing to do, and so we turned them on, and all of a sudden we were overwhelmed because we had more things than we could actually get done. And so what happens is you just, your technician, no fault of their own, they have way too many, PMs on their plate. And so what do? They do what they can and they close the rest out. And the problem that we're seeing with that from a long-term perspective is, the longer that strategy goes on, the more randomness there is to it. And there is no strategy behind which thing didn't we do this month, because we just packed too many in. And honestly, it was probably the thing that was the hardest to get to, that didn't get done. And now that one's consistently not getting done. And maybe it's the most important thing in our facility, right? But we've kind of stripped back that strategy. The one thing that frankly I'm excited about working with, your group and other groups like yours with the data and the system is starting to bring strategy back to operations, as opposed to, playing the inevitable firefighter. And I'm not saying that's going to change, right? We're not necessarily going to change that, but what we would like to do is change your ability to tell your own story and be able to walk in and say with a definitive answer, here are the things that we do not have staffing to PM, and we are strategically making these. Have a conversation about that risk versus you playing firefighter and things break, and now you're constantly walking into the CFO's office saying, we knew it was going to happen someday, but we didn't really have a strategy around it. How are you dealing with that kind of operational side of balancing that work order and PM and outsourcing? And, there's a lot of, it sounds so easy when you break it down, but ultimately, there's people involved in which contractor actually works as a partner, and it takes time to form those relationships. And so how are you navigating those waters of, managing all those different pieces and parts within your organization?
I think for us, for our situation, we've been a very lean staff, particularly in the last 12, 13 years. And I think our strategy, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, has been trying to capture what we have, what our assets really are accurately. And then on top of that, start to determine what is the optimal way to operate and maintain and steward all of those assets. And we tend to break them down by individual buildings, and that's good. And we can talk about those as an entity. But I think the thing at the heart of it is, to me, information, accurate information, is the thing that gives us power or control or the ability to tell our story in a way that people that aren't technically minded or facility experts, maybe they're from academia in our situation, but there are leadership and there people on our board of trustees. Many of them have been successful in business, so they have some business acumen, is to be able to tell our story into relatable terms that they can understand. And I'm constantly getting the feel that they want the metrics, they want to have a visual, and they don't want partial information or something that might not really be authentic or true. And I feel like if we can capture even this kind of granular information down and compile it, you see trends, you see problems, you're able to explain why is it better to have an in-house tradesperson versus outsourcing, or what is our optimal level of staffing, or how can we do something now differently than what we used to do. And so to me, it kind of comes down to knowing what it is that you have and being able to manage it and make smart, informed decisions. So
I clicked too fast, but you said the magic word, right? It's about what do we have? That's the big thing. And, you know, I always have conversations right inside with my children, and my 13-year-old is starting to get really interested in what we do. And I try to make it relatable to him. And, you know, the one thing that I tell him, because, you know, he's like, well, why are you trying to solve a problem? And the way that I finally dug down and got it down to very simple, you know, metrics is, let's face it, facilities, PMs, all those things they're talking about, you know, especially when we're talking about PMs, we're talking about assets that are, you know, depending on the size of the organization, $5,000 or $10,000 or more. And, you know, really at the core of it, one of the biggest issues is that for most of us, you know, who don't own a big facility, the things that we own that are worth more than $5,000 besides our house and maybe some of the things in it are the cars in our driveway. And I told my son, you know, frankly, the problem with the industry right now is they're trying to do oil changes and they don't know how many cars are in the driveway. And that comes down to asset management. And I think that's at the core of what we try to solve for all of our clients. And, you know, you're no exception to that rule, which is, what do we have? Where is it? And can I go find it again and edit the data as opposed to throw the data away and have to start over? Because once we know what we have, and we know where it is and we know what impact, right? Because the building that it's in has an impact on its priority. The space that it serves has an impact on its priority, right? How much energy it consumes has an impact on its priority. And one of the things that we talked about in your instance is, you know, from an energy perspective, at least, is that central utility plant. And yes, it works, but boy, it is an inefficient kind of old way of doing energy. To your point, you can't even find technicians anymore because it's not really something that they trade, because it is a dying technology in some ways. However, the cost to decentralize, even though it would save energy, is a huge pill to swallow, and you kind of have to do it at least in a half or all at once kind of deal, because otherwise you don't get the savings of shutting your central utility plant down. But all those assets come into play. And the thing that I love that we bring to our clients is the fact that they now have maps of every building, and they know where every asset is via the map, and they have all the data, and they can get the O&M manuals or the video, the how to fix it from one of your technicians who might be on the way out the door, but they're paired with a younger technician who are capturing all that institutional knowledge and making it available for that next generation to come in and serve Hamline. And so, all of that stuff said, what is it for you, right, that you're seeing kind of early on in your journey, that instant kind of like aha moment of, okay, I now have a system that has all of my data, and it's got all of my assets. It's connected to a dashboarding tool that's connected to my work orders and my operations data. And in some ways, having all of that data is so empowering. But frankly, we had the conversation sitting up your office. It's also extremely overwhelming, because now you have all of this kind of operational and decision-making data at your fingertips. Good news is it's now transparent and defensible, to those people who maybe aren't facilities people, and you can easily show them, well, here's what a boiler looks like inside a boiler room that you've never stepped foot inside of, and start to relate them to your world. But that being said, how is having all of that data changing the way you're starting to think about the problem? Because before it was a lot of chasing your tail or hiring consultants, and it was good to hire consultants come in and help you make those decisions, but you weren't really owning that data, and it took a lot of your time to frankly inform the consultants to come up with a report. The goal here is to really put the data and you in the driver's seat of your own data. And again, it takes some adjustment, and you have to get over the overwhelming, amount of data to start dwindling it down to saying, let's make some simple decisions first, and we can get more complicated after that. But how do you think that's changing the way that you're looking at your world now, 30 years into, plus years into your career?
I think it's taking a lot of the mystery and assumption out of the equation. I like the idea that in real time we can see, what's really happening, and so we're able to react. Again, we're able to make and manage um, uh, the situation and the items that the key performance indicators that we might be wanting to track. We can see that in real time, and I think that's just really empowering, and knowing that when we would make a decision, how we're going to use or deploy our resources, how we're going to use our people or vendors, or how we start getting into capital investments. It just helps us make better decisions. And as we're able to, within the university framework, be more credible and be able to have more accurate information, we end up starting to gain the credibility and the trust of all of the stakeholders on campus, because we know what we're talking about. And I don't think that's always been the case. And some of it is frankly because there wasn't a means years ago to find out where all the blueprints were, and then is this actually what was built, and is this really how it operates? And so again, having good information that's readily available and in a format that's easy to understand and work with is critical nowadays.
Awesome. Sticking on the asset, and I want to focus on more the energy management side of this, because especially talking to folks around the country, there's pockets and things like that of things happening. And Curious from your perspective up where you're located. I mean, in Madison, we're seeing things like the requirement from a city level to baseline energy consumption so that basically they don't want you to, increase. And then at some point, they're probably going to match you against your peers and want you to get down to where your peer level is and things like that. They haven't really outlined that yet, but we're seeing in the city of Denver and Colorado, greater buildings under 50 or over 50,000 square feet needing this. And in 2026, I think, or don't quote me on this, but there's a date somewhere out there in the future where buildings over 25,000 square feet have to be part of that program. Up where you're at, and because we talk about energy a lot, and it's something that's important to you, two-part question maybe here, but number one, what's your biggest concern with energy right now? And I know that a big part of that is connected to your fuel consumption when they say that you have to start using your generator, run your steam plant, and not, pull off the grid, and that has impacts. But beyond that, is some of that being driven by, I'll call it governance or outside factors, or is that focus on energy really driven internally right now?
Well, initially, I would say it's the cost of our energy. So from our local utility, we basically we run our steam plant on natural gas, and we're trying to get the best rates we can. And so we have an interruptible. So when it gets really cold here in Minnesota, they'll tell us sometimes only a few hours before, we need you to switch off due to load. And then our backup is number 2 fuel or diesel fuel, both of which are carbon. And so going beyond the just the costs of that kind of fuel and that type of energy, there are regulations and legislation that not only is federal, but even more stringent state legislation that is earmarked 2030 to have a certain amount of decarbonization, and 2040 to basically be carbon free in terms of how we receive. But with the old system that we have, there isn't a way to go off of natural gas or the diesel fuel. And so down the road, I would envision that there will be carbon taxes on places like us that are using tremendous amounts of fossil fuels because we haven't converted to other forms. And I think beyond just the regulation, I think higher ed and Hamline wants to be good stewards of our resources, and sustainability has been around for a long time. And frankly, it's part of the image, the recruitment, and the retention of students. If we continue to operate a heating plant that's at 63% efficient compared to other forms of energy use, electric, whatever, where we could be either close to, with condensing hot water boilers, close to 94 or 95%, or even potentially things like geothermal that would be hundreds of percent more efficient. So that saves money and dollars. There's at some point a return on investment at some point. And but it's also the right thing to be doing. And we need to be, those are some of the things that are driving looking at our energy and heating infrastructure. And they are big things. They do require multiple phases over extended periods of time. We think that it would at least be 6 years to convert over. And there's impacts to our programming in operation on the campus in order to do that, because some of it is fairly disruptive on the campus. But there's still things that need to be considered because we are beyond the useful life and age of the equipment that we have to do our heating. So energy is a huge part. If I took off all of our labor in our budget, our natural gas and electric and diesel fuel would represent over 20% of our budget. And so it has a significant impact.
Absolutely. Let's keep moving here. And and frankly, it's all related. And I think that's the story that we want to tell here today too, is that, from staffing on down through how operations, and you're tracking your operations data, down to the asset level, so we can start actually tracking those costs. And, part of what we're working towards with Ken and his team is making sure that we know, like, hey, here's what the cost of replacement is. Here's how much money we've spent on this thing in the last 6 months. And is there a threshold of percentage of spend to which we start to say, nope, this is the story now. This is the tipping point. This is the trigger point to which we start to pull these triggers, because we've now crossed that threshold of we're going to start sinking money in, and the ROI is now there to replace it. It's still budgeted. It still has to be planned. It still has to be all those other things. But the idea is tracking that data down to that point. And, our next topic really plays into that, which is space management. Because all of those assets that we're talking about, and when we talk about the cost of operations and all those things, I mean, Ken says it well, right? Even the sustainability is down to, the retention of the people who use that space and frankly end up paying the bills, which are, the students and their attendance, which is the most important part to your business model up there, Ken, is making sure that you have people attending and getting value out of the university. And so all those assets end up supporting the people who are in those spaces and using those spaces and attending those classes, or using the offices, or maybe now after COVID, not using the offices. And, that's part of this conversation. And frankly, it's not just a higher ed problem, especially with space. It's commercial real estate's having a heck of a time right now trying to figure out how to repurpose and reuse space for the way that people want to operate now and work from home, but maybe still have a place to go to. We're seeing that in government right now. We're seeing that all over, frankly. And so, when we talk about space utilization and the changes that are going on, and the energy behind these things, and how much money it costs to operate maybe space that isn't used the same anymore, all of that data starts to tell a story of, are we doing the right thing? Do we have too much space? Do we have enough space? Is the space organized correctly to get the maximum usage out of it? I mean, those are all things that, are part of that data conversation, and are ultimately going to come down to the next part that we'll talk about, which is really securing the budgets behind these things, that ultimately all this data is telling us the story of. With space use and higher ed's no different than healthcare and some of these other groups, that COVID had a huge impact on how we use space, either during or after, and especially with universities and things like that, and kids learning and being more used to being online and doing some of those activities. And frankly, lecture style classrooms we're seeing kind of on the tail end of their useful life. They want more collaborative space and tables and things like that. With all of that said, what are your new challenges now, and how are you kind of dealing with that in terms of, not just the challenge, but what are your opportunities and maybe reuse of those spaces that you're seeing, or, maximization of space, maybe to reduce some of that energy overhead in spaces that maybe you don't need anymore?
Yeah, space utilization to me is a real important thing for us at the university. I think things have dramatically changed in the last 4 years. I know our activity level and our population is significantly less than it used to be. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. My gauge for that is I look at our parking lots. One, for the longest time, all it was there's no parking, there's no parking. And now I often see some of our surface parking lots that have less than 20% of the stalls right in the middle of the academic school year. And even the non higher ed use of the campus seems to be somewhat reduced. I think students actually use the campus in a different way than they used to. Sure, there's still a tailgate before a football game, and but they're using space differently. And I know this isn't just in higher ed, but there's a lot of the workforce, they're not here right now, but they're working. And so they're not working in their hard office, they're not working in their cubicle, they're just not here. But yet we're maintaining, we're heating, we're cooling, we're cleaning, we're doing all these things. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is space is expensive. Having space is expensive. And whether there's somebody in there or not using it on a regular basis, or what's considered a regular basis, there's a cost to that. And we've had a number of spaces that we've basically taken offline or that aren't occupied. And so we have a glut of spaces. Now, are those spaces in demand or how could we reuse them? I think that's a whole nother question. But I think getting a handle on how the spaces are used, when they're used, I've always been thinking about how could I put in a sensor to know when somebody is in a classroom or in a conference room, not to identify them, but just to know that it's being used. And I had a conversation with a colleague at a larger university not too far away, and he oversaw custodial, and he told me his way of knowing if the buildings are being used was by the amount of toilet paper he needed to keep using or ordering. So I think that that's a part of the equation of consideration, is how to effectively utilize space, and then knowing based on condition of those space and what the real needs might be, how could it be right-sized or renovated or modified. And there's probably, and this could be justified, but there could be value in not needing to build new if there are enough spaces that could meet your future energy needs and have the flexibility into them, and could handle the accessibility and all of the other needs that are currently being required. But again, it's about being able to have all of that information to make good, smart, strategic decisions.
So, sake of time, we'll move into securing budgets, and then we'll take some Q&A here. But along those lines, right? I mean, we talk about, hey, maybe that is the next data point for you, Ken, that we explore, which is, let's find a company, and they exist. I have some other customers who have done something similar, and it's basically a sensor that tells you how many hours a day that space is occupied, and that's really the data point that's pulled, which equates then to a percentage overall of how much that space is used. And maybe you take out the nighttime hours as the percentage because you figure nobody's going to be in there using it anyhow. And you can start to look at not only, hey, how often is this room used or this space, But now we can connect that to the cost to operate that room. And we can start to look at, hey, here's all of our spaces that are under 25% used. And this is the cost to operate those. What do we want to do? And how do we increase that? And what is our threshold for use that's acceptable in terms of that space is actually well utilized and doesn't need a change? And we can start getting operationally intelligent around that. Now, ultimately, all of that, and I just talked about it, but it comes down to securing budgets and doing good capital planning and knowing where our priorities are. And this is the part that we're working through with you and is a little overwhelming is, okay, now we have all these data points. We know how much you touch an asset. We know what that asset serves. We know what building it's in. We know maybe what department that's in. And now we can start to look at these things. I think now what becomes a fun part in my mind, just because I like the data side of this is, hey, what do you want as a business strategy? Right? What are those thresholds in those different areas? What is the threshold percentage of how much of a assets, total replacement value we spend in the last 6 months? What is that threshold for replacement, right? And what is our tolerance for that versus maybe if we had all the budget in the world and we could replace things at the end of useful life and everything would be great. Like almost nobody lives in that world. And so, when we talk about things like that, you know, how is this going to change how you look at things in the future? Again, not knowing all the parameters, but just knowing that we can actually start to be strategic and create reports and dashboards that highlight the next spend that's based upon our internal strategies of what we said data thresholds are, not necessarily the professor that's yelling the loudest and gets the most attention. We can now point at data that maybe says, actually your air conditioning is pretty good compared to the rest of campus. And, we can start spending money strategically versus, reactionary.
Yeah, budget is it's tough nowadays. I think I have seen a number of changes over the years as to how the university looks and handles budget. We actually went through a zero budgeting exercise a few years back, just a couple of years ago, and I actually enjoyed doing that because it traditionally had been just looked at budgets. Well, we're going to increase it across the board this much, and so I like the idea when you have really limited resources to be able to justify. And if the numbers and the analysis comes out that we actually had more money than we needed to, well, so be it. But I intuitively know that isn't the case. But I don't need to make all of the strategic decisions as the leader of facilities for our institution, nor do I want to. But I do want to present information that should be considered by those people that do ultimately make the decisions on the distribution of budget. And it doesn't have to be based on politics. It doesn't have to be based on silos and all those kinds of things. It's what's in the best interest of the university and how we end up supporting it. And that goes for operational budgets. It goes for capital budgets. And I think that whole idea of really getting a hold of that total cost of ownership, being able to communicate that again to leadership is just at the heart of trying to do things in a smarter way in the future.
Fantastic. Very well said. With that, let's see if we have any questions that we have.
Yes, I'm happy to hop in here. Josh, Ken, thank you so much for kind of going through some of the major facility management challenges right now. So one of the questions that we have comes from John. What type of fuel source do you see as sustainable?
think that's unique to every facility, every operation. For us, when we've looked at it, and again, I'm not actually an engineer, so I'm one of those lay people. So I have to listen to engineers and consultants and those people. But we came up with a solution going from high pressure steam to a number of different options, and they have different price tags and probably different returns on investment. But it ends up being a hybrid. And because of some phased installation for us, we've broken it down into 3 distinct phases, and it's geographically based. So we're looking at either on 2 of our phases, 2/3 of our campus, either going to condensed hot water boilers, a series of those, decentralized, or we'd be going to geothermal with vertical wells into the aquifer. And it's the newest technology. The condensed hot water boilers, as I understand it, are about 20 years plus old technology. But if I didn't have to worry about just the cost, I would probably go with the newer technology in the geothermal, because it would be helping us with other needs that we have with air handlers and HV, the chillers and HVAC and heat pumps could handle the cooling needs as well. So, but I think everybody's situation would be unique, and I wouldn't be the person to be able to say there's just one solution. I should note that in our scenario, we actually would change our high pressure steam on our last phase to a low pressure steam. So we wouldn't completely be getting away from fossil fuel potentially, but it would be way more efficient. And part of that is because of the extreme costs of, we have buildings that are 144 years old, and the distribution systems for those would all have to be totally gutted in the building and rebuilt. And so we've made a hybrid model for our infrastructure change. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. Another question here. Actually, it's a comment from a different John. My budgets over the past 5 years have been blown over cost increases and supply chain issues. Is this something you've experienced as well?
Yes. It's incredible. I think, our topic was, or our title for the webinar here was 1,000 cuts, death by 1,000 cuts, but there's a couple of gouges in there too. And there's just so many of these things coming together. It's by far the most difficult period of time I've ever had in facilities management, has been these last few years. I think even with slightly modest increases to our operating budget, we're probably not funded well on our annual reinvestment for capital. But then layer on top of that 20% or more inflationary increases, and we have eroded our buying power. And part of our solution to be able to get workforce is to increase pay, just to retain people, or even to get them to even think about applying. So there are these financial pressures that are really real. For us here in St. Paul, Minnesota, we had the mildest winter in my entire lifetime. And we benefited on our operating side from snow removal, salt, no use, heating, record warm temperatures. I don't even know if I experienced more than 2 days below zero, which is unheard of. and we didn't damage our equipment. We didn't have the stresses to operate when we're at 20 or 30 below zero. Just many, many different benefits. And as a result of that, we actually made it this year. But next year, it could be the opposite, because I know how average temperature and precipitation works. So it's one of those things that's particularly challenging for facility managers in the very northern climates when you're dealing with weather extremes and so forth. So they do have a big impact, and those are things that we can't control. But we do have to build into the budget some levels of contingency to anticipate that, because if you don't anticipate it, you're doing a disservice, I believe, to your company or institution, to not recognize that that kind of a risk exists.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ken. Another question we have here, and I believe we have time for maybe one more question. Do you think we've settled into the new normal of post-COVID space utilization, or are people, students, employees going to continue to slowly come back to the physical buildings?
My personal opinion is I think it's changed forever. I think enough people have been able to show that they're able to function in different ways. And I think from a facility standpoint, I think we should recognize that and look for opportunities to incorporate those social changes and norms along with it. And I think if the successful institutions and facilities that recognize that change and respond to it will be the ones that will succeed in the long term.
Yeah, and I'll add one bit of flavor to that, outside of Ken's world, just because, you know, I see it all a little bit. I agree it's changed forever, except for the ones that never changed. Because there are industries that went through COVID, and I'll use our good friends that we work a lot with over in the AEC industry, and you have architects and engineers and contractors who frankly live and breathe based upon in-person collaboration. We're seeing a little mix there, but those industries frankly found a way to come back even, you know, in the midst of COVID. And so, yes, I agree. I think it's changed forever, except for those that maybe never had the opportunity to change because they are so focused on those in-person kind of interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ken, Josh, thank you again so much for this presentation today. It looks like we are just about out of time. You know, I want to thank our audience for joining us today, and a special thank you to AkitaBox for sponsoring this webinar. A recording from today's session will be made available on our magazine's website, facilityexecutive.com, and at akitabox.com. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.